Good. Well, again, we appreciate what it is that you've done. Doc, do you have anything to add to this, or Terry, as far as?
Just present them with the plaque or
Kind of face this way, I think.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Once again, congratulations to you. John? And again, let me say that these three board members are volunteers that are here on behalf of certainly the whole group. You're missing a couple tonight, but your efforts are certainly appreciated within the community. So thank you for what it is that you do.
thank you.
Okay, and before we let you come up, Dan, I do want to recognize, we got a group of young ladies in the back that I understand are the future of this entire area, looking at nurses to be, is that right? And I understand that for whatever reason, you've been asked to come and actually take part in a city council meeting. So we're glad to have you here, and certainly we're all supportive because as I see an aging group up here, we're going to need you in the future. So thanks for being here. And with that, Dan Gary, you're on. Norfolk Airport Authority board members to make a presentation to elected officials regarding their proposed fiscal year 2014-15 budget.
Yeah, Dan Gary is my name with the Airport Authority. Let's see, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I don't remember which meeting we were here, but we were here to and discuss the Norfolk's Airport Authority's budget. In that budget, we discussed some hangars to be built in the future. It didn't involve this year's funding, but it did involve funding for the next 10 years, I believe. We were gonna, we've had a meeting since then of ourselves, and perhaps, and we've had some pushback on this a little bit with the, concerning the tax increase and our budget increase for this year. Perhaps we've made a decision a little bit faster than we should have, and we should have done more study, probably. I think we made the decision based on the fact that the hangar funds became available and the federal funds became available. So, hey, let's fill hangars because the funds are available. So whether it made sense for the airport or not, I don't know. And there were a lot of questions that were asked the other night that I was here, and we didn't have very good answers to them. And I'm not sure I have real good answers to them right now, but so we kind of decided to delay at our last meeting. There were delay until we did some further study and that on. So right at the moment, we don't plan on building the hangars right this moment. But you know, your resolution is still in there. So we have a plan. We're going to do an in-depth study of the rents that we're charging, and we've started that. So, and I think the comment the other night was the fact that the rents are a little low, and they do. It's hard to make a comparison, but we're working on that. So we're going to do an in-depth study of the rate. We're going to keep track of a better track of hangar vacancies because, you call us up now and we say, well, hangars are all full. Well, were they full the whole year or whatever, but track that. And then, figure out how they turn over. Most of the time when somebody turns a hangar over, they've got a friend that wants a hangar, so we get told that, hey, so-and-so's gonna take our hangar, and if we got somebody else on the list, it's kind of a done deal before we get it. But anyway, and then I think we need to keep better track of the inquiries that we get. If I ask Terry how many inquiries we get, about 2 a month. So, okay. So I think we ought to have those exactly written down when we got an inquiry, and then keep track of who was it that was inquiring. Was it a hobby guy that has an airplane in his garage and he wants to put it someplace, or was it a business wanting to move here, or what it is? So I think we need to take better track of that. I wish I could find a way. We're working on it. I wish I could find a way that we could better analyze what economic benefit to the airport does it do to have a hangar? So the first thing we're gonna do is separate how much fuel sales comes from people that have airplanes hangared at the airport. Find out how much that is. And I don't know how to track that as what they do, but we'll have a record of how many businesses have hangars, how many individuals, how many. And those-
Wouldn't it be just as, and I don't know, Dan, but wouldn't it be just as easy to have a separate, for each hangar,
Oh, yeah.
have a separate, the owner of the hangar is Dan Gary, and therefore the volume that you purchase
Yeah,
as
yeah.
far as gas and things like that, I think it'd be beneficial certainly to the council as you come forward each
Oh, yeah.
year and,
Because right now, if you were to ask us how much fuel got sold to people that have hangars,
right,
I don't know.
yeah.
So we don't keep track of that. So there's more work that we can do on that.
Appreciate it.
How much fuel they buy, and then I think we'll do follow-up calls for those people that do call and ask for hangars and find out, okay, did they move to another city? Did they sell their airplane? Are they still interested in, where'd they go?
Yeah.
We don't know, we just have calls once in a while. And then I want to separate the accounting and get the hangar expenses and the hangar income separate from the general fund. So right now, it all goes into one pile. So I don't know how much we spend on electricity for the hangars or how much maintenance on the hangars. It's all, airport maintenance is airport maintenance. I don't know how much goes to each one. So we don't have that separated very well. So we need to do that. What does it mean for our snow removal and those kind of things? So I think on the budget, we'll separate an accounting out that shows hangar rent. Now, there is a misconception, so to speak. I mean, the tax money goes to subsidize our hangars. Well, we do bring in $70,000 a year in hangar income. Because we've invested in hangars in the past, because they're paid for, and because we charge rent on them, $70,000 of our income comes from hangars. And that $70,000 gets thrown in the general fund pile. So when we come in here and we ask you for a tax increase to build hangars, well, what we're asking you for is, can we take the $70,000 that we're bringing in off our hangars and reinvest it back in hangars? So, but if we take $70,000 out of our operating budget, then we're short over there. So, it does take an increase of taxes to cover that. So if we didn't have any hangars, we would be asking you for $70,000 more money to operate the airport. Since we do have hangars, and there have been investments in hangars in the past, for the last 10 years or so, or since we built hangars, or since the last one was paid for, we've been able to take that $70,000 and apply it to the general fund and ask for less money on our budget. So anyway, we plan on doing that. So we're going to do more study like this. I know there was a resolution passed to fund this. I don't know whether, we're not going to do anything, we're not going to build this hangar for a while. I don't know. We'll do more study on this, and we'll come back to you on that. So I guess if you wanted to have a resolution to rescind that funding, or you just wanted to sit and wait, or whatever, I don't know what you might like to do, but we're going to wait. We're not rushing right out to do the construction right now. Now, with that being said, the hangar money is available and the federal money is available. We got about 6 months on that, but if we go past that way, then we'll have to reapply, and we don't know when it'll become available again. But perhaps we were a little premature on our asking because the money was available rather than studying our hangar needs.
Well, I appreciate that, Dan. I think it makes a lot of sense. Josh, looks to me like you had something you wanted to,
I was just going to ask Dan, do you have a timeline on when your study might be done, or when you hope it would be done? Study on hangar rates and
We would have that in approximately 6 months. So, 6 months, and then, of course, some of these things like keeping track of the inquiries, that starts right now, but if you call us in 6 months and we have 10
Right.
inquiries, this is gonna be a change in management that we'll have, so anytime you wanna ask us how many people called this thing, 16
Yep.
people called from this date to this date, so we're gonna, so.
Well, I tell you what, Dan, there's always a reason this gentleman is sitting right next to me. So with that being said, Clint Shukai, what do you recommend that we do here as far as what has been approved?
In regard to the resolution?
Yes,
The resolution that was approved had two components to it. The first component was the budget levy authority for this year, which needs to remain unchanged. And the second item related to a commitment from the council to fund in relation to the necessary monies to meet the obligations for the hangar. I think to go back to square one and take a step back and put you there would be for the council to direct us to come back with a resolution that would just rescind the second portion of that, and then you can later consider a resolution that would make the commitment to the airport authority at such time as you come forward with the new plans and you receive it, and then respond to that. That would be my suggestion. If that makes sense.
how do you feel about that suggestion, Mr. Gary?
Well, yeah, that's fine. So I guess
Okay,
the
what-
resolution had two halves to it, so we need to
We need to keep the first
the
half.
first one and do what you want on the second, yeah, or separate it at least. Yeah, so that'd be fine, whatever.
Okay. Any questions for Dan before he did all the work you're putting into this, Dan? Certainly is going to make it much easier for this council. And again, we're just going to stay in contact, having dialogue going through the year.
Okay.
All right?
All right, thank you.
Thanks very much, Dan. Okay, so you have your charge.
We'll have a resolution for you on the next agenda.
Okay, very good. All right, we're going to move on then to a public hearing here to comply with NRS 18-1755 to consider acquiring undivided half interest in tax lot located in the northeast quarter, the southwest quarter of Section 35, Township 24 North, Range 1, west of the 6 p.m. Madison County, Nebraska, owned by Herbert Reese Marital Trust and Mary Virginia Reese Revocable Trust. So I will open this public hearing. Are you speaking to this, Clint?
I can, or Dennis
Dennis?
maybe?
Okay,
The Reese's owned a piece of property that was just to the bottom and to the right of the drawing that's in front of you. And they owned a half interest in the hatched area of tax lot 5 to provide access to their property. The city of Norfolk owned the other half interest. The Reese's have sold their property to Lyman Ritchie for a gravel operation. Lyman Ritchie owns property to the east of this property that they will use for access. Lyman Ritchie wasn't interested in having any interest in tax lot 5. So the city of Norfolk is gonna buy the half interest we don't have in tax lot 5 for the same price per acre as what the Lyman Ritchie paid for the rest of the farm. Allow the city then to have complete control of our wastewater treatment facility as well as the transfer station access. So I think it'll be beneficial to the city long term.
okay. Council, any questions for Dennis at all? Okay, as this is, I'm sorry.
How wide is
Jim.
tax lot 5?
It was
Like-
20 feet.
20, okay.
And then the city had, over the years, had acquired another 5 or 6 feet to the east of that, so it's about a 27 foot wide strip through there.
What was the total purchase price then?
$2,520.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Second page of the picture.
Again, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone else that wants to come forward and speak to this or may have questions regarding this? If not, if no further from the council then, I will close the hearing. And I would ask for consideration of the real estate sales agreement as was presented you.
Your Honor, I'd move consideration of real estate sales for the city purchase of the undivided half interest of Lot 5 and as it proceeds along.
Okay, we have a motion with a second. Any further discussion at all? If not, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative.
All right. And next, we have a public hearing to comply with the provisions of NRS 18-1755 to acquire property at 1004 Kenningstein Avenue, the east 62 feet of lots 9 and 10, Block 4, Kenningstein, second addition to the city of Norfolk, Madison County, Nebraska. Again, I will open the public hearing, and Trent, do you want to speak to this one for us? Seems to me that you're involved somewhat in this one,
I
or?
can. Actually, Clint's done most of the work on the
Okay,
attorney side of this, but I can explain the fire side if anybody has questions or concerns about the property maintenance, some of the mowing charges that we've had. And then there's been several, code violations, so to speak, that we, Clint processed through the court system. So, go ahead, Clint.
I didn't want to steal your thunder since
No,
this is,
that's perfectly fine.
this has changed a little bit from, in the, what we've got here is, this is a house at 1004, I think that's the right address, at 1004 Kenningstein. Was damaged by fire back in April. The codes officials gave a notice that the house needed to be destroyed, needed to be taken down. Gave them 30 days to do that. After that didn't happen, there was, the house was not tore down. There were a couple of code enforcement charges for failing to remove the fire damaged structure, for failure to take away some of the refuse around the property. This is one of those where there was a significant amount, there was enough money paid from the insurance company, as we understand it, that it could have been utilized to remove this, but that money went off someplace else where we can't claw it back. That's one of those that we've talked to you occasionally about, bills that have been in the legislature that would require that there be a set-off of insurance proceeds whenever there's fire damaged property like that, so that the public doesn't get caught doing that. I guess the simple answer to that is the bankers lobby has trumped the interest of the public in regard to that and has precluded that bill from getting passed. So we put in a plug for that one. But what we did here is we've got a stipulation in the agenda packet. We had a couple of prosecution from the tickets written from the code staff. We had a couple of those things, and basically the stipulation that we entered into with this gentleman is that we could go ahead and use the money that's budgeted for that, tear down the property, assess it against the property, wait a couple of years, foreclose on the property, and 3 or 4 years from now, we now own the property and we'll be able to sell it. What we've done here is we've tried to cut to the quick in regard to that, and since between the time that he was in court here a couple of weeks ago and today, that house has since been torn down with city monies. So what we've done here is, when he went to court, he was fined a total of $3,000 on the 2 tickets, and we've got an agreement that's outlined here. We can go through it step by step, but basically, if you want, but basically what happens is he's going to pay the taxes, the back taxes on the property, pay the mowing charges on the property, and he's going to deed the property to the city after we've gotten a clean title. City then can take that property and can go and sell it and divest it to claw back the cost of the asbestos inspection, asbestos abatement, and the removal, the termination of the utilities. And I believe I saw something today, Trent, that's about $12,000 or $13,000, I think.
That's correct.
And so by doing it this way, I think it's better for the neighborhood, because we'll get, the city will get the property back, and we can try to move forward and make some better use of the property going forward. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. In order, what we've really got here is that the statute requires that you have to approve the taking of the property in the city's name. You can't simply send the city attorney to court to acquire that property. So everything that we did in court is contingent upon your saying it's okay for the city to become the owner of that property. So we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, council. Any questions at all for Clint? Again, this is a public hearing. If there's anyone in the audience that wants to come forward and may have questions or speak to this, please feel free.
So the total cost of the demo was 12 to 13,000? Is that right?
Yeah, council, mayor, council, I don't have the exact figure. It's right around there somewhere. I can get that to y'all. It's, it came in, of course, in separate little increments. The asbestos abatement was, you remember what, it was quite a bit on this one.
Got it. John sent it to me in an email today, $12,898.54 plus utility termination of $266.18. So we're just a little bit over, probably about $13,150 is what we'll have in the lot.
And that'll be put up for public auction then at some time, when this is all resolved.
Yeah, there'll be an effort to sell it somehow or another.
Okay, thank you.
If you remember, at one point, council, they, Trenton Group came before us and asked for an increase in the budget to be able to do these kind of things, and I think it's probably paying big dividends for us. It gets rid of some unsightly stuff that we don't need on the city streets, so good job. Anyone else that has any comments or questions? If not, I'm going to close the public hearing, and I'm going to ask for consideration of Resolution 2014-30 approving the acquisition of property located at 1004 Kenningstein Avenue from James E. Treat. Do I have a motion for consideration?
I'll make a motion for consideration, Your Honor.
Second.
All right, we have a motion with a second for consideration. Any further discussion? If not, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, Resolution 2014-30 is adopted.
All right. And next, we're going to move on to a public hearing to review the City of Norfolk's fiscal year 2014-15 municipal budget. And as well, at the same time, I'm going to open the hearing to review the city's 2014-15 proprietary budget, water, sewer, and solid waste. I'm going to open the public hearing and looking to you, Randy, to do some speaking.
Yes, Your Honor. Oops, going too fast here. Trying to run this with my left hand, and that isn't working too well. The cover slide you'll see is the library. We put the library on this cover because of the ballot language that's going to be on the general election in November, authorizing, if approved, a $7.4 million expansion of the library. There's nothing in this budget related to that because we didn't want to presume it either pass or not pass. But that's one of the council's priorities for this coming year, and we thought that would be an appropriate thing to have on the cover of the budget. So I think it's kind of a nice picture of the library. One of the more interesting slides that we have in the budget is a 10-year comparison of the capital budget to the total budget. And you can see our capital budget went up fairly quickly in that 2010 to 2012 timeframe, and that was because of the $16.4 million recreation bond issue and that big recreation project for Aquaventure and Memorial Field and all of that. And then it went back down to about $19.5 million after that, as that project was winding up. You'll see it's been just remarkably consistent. The last 3 years' budget for capital has been right around $19.5 million. The components of that capital have changed a lot as we go through those 3 years, but the total amount has stayed remarkably consistent. In spite of the same amount of capital in the budget, we have the biggest budget in the city's history with an $81 million budget if you look at that blue line at the top. And that's about a $8.1 million increase from the prior year budget. There's 4 funds that account for the majority of that. Each of these funds have over $1 million increase. And it's primarily being driven by industrial development expenditures. Our LB 840 fund, which is the top line on this slide, increases well, it almost triples, and that's because of the $3.6 million of funding that we've got budgeted for the natural gas pipeline for Tejas and other industries that are bringing the natural gas pipeline in from the east that's going to connect to Northern Natural Gas's pipeline. In the Community Development Block Grant Fund budget, the third line down, you'll see another big increase, about a $1.4 million increase in that budget, almost doubling the budget. That too is related to the natural gas pipeline. We've got a total of $5 million of funding budgeted for that. $3.6 million is coming from the LB 840 Economic Development Fund. And $1.4 million is planned to come from the Site and Building Development Fund grant from the state of Nebraska, which will then be forwarded to help fund for the natural gas pipeline. We have another big increase in the special assessment funds, the second line down. It's up about $2.7 million. That's due to $3.9 million to extend water and sewer to industrial sites around the city. We've got $1.6 million in the special assessment funds for sewer south of the river. We've got another $855,000 budgeted in the sewer fund for that. There's also $1.4 million for the Northeast Industrial Sewer Main in the special assessment funds, with another $1.8 million in the sewer fund, and $917,000 the Northeast Industrial Water Main Project in the special assessment funds, with another $922,000 in the water fund. So all these big increases that I just talked about are related to industrial development. The fourth line down there, the Capital Construction Fund, that's increase is primarily due to the Norfolk Riverfront Trail Project. We have $1.25 million budgeted in the Capital Construction Fund for that, with $1 million to come from a grant through the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, and $125,000 each from the city and the NRD to provide for the local match on that project. And trail projects are the first Marin City Council goal in this year's budget. And that accounts for the vast majority of that $8.1 million increase. Almost $8 million of it is over the months. Total budget, as I said, was $81 million with an $8.1 million increase. And this slide shows the 5 major categories of expenditure and also fund balance that make up that $81 million. By far the biggest increase is in operations and maintenance, which is up almost $4.4 million or 38% from last year. That's the second line down on this slide. That increase is primarily due to that natural gas pipeline I was talking about. The $5 million is budgeted in operation and maintenance. It's not budgeted in capital since the city won't own it. So, instead budgeted in O&M. Ending fund balance increases $1.5 million. Biggest portion of that increase is in the debt service fund, which goes up $835,000 as occupation taxes accumulated to pay debt service on the 2010 facility bonds that I mentioned earlier. Those bonds are callable in December 2015, and I expect when you look at next year's budget, you'll see that fund balance going way down as we use those occupation tax monies that are accumulated to call as many of those bonds as we can on the earliest call date from those available funds. The next biggest increase in ending balance is a $661,000 increase in group insurance fund balance. This is due to a $650,000 increase in budgeted beginning fund balance, and that was caused by actual claims in the 12-13 fiscal year being a lot less than we estimated at the time last year's budget was put together. Another big increase here is in transfers. They go up almost $1.3 million. And that's primarily due to a $1.7 million transfer of cash from the water fund to the sewer fund. In 2012, we had a $4 million revenue bond issue, and we split it evenly between the water and sewer fund. Since then, the sewer fund's needs have grown faster than the water fund's needs as our capital projects are proceeding. And instead of having a new bond issue, we plan to transfer the cash of $1.7 million that the water fund has from that bond issue over to the sewer fund, and also transfer the same amount of bonds over to the sewer fund. So on an accrual basis, there'll be no effect. You're transferring cash, you're transferring debt, no effect to fund balance, but this is a cash basis budget as required by state law. So if you're transferring cash, it does have to show up as a transfer on this year's budget. Other big increases are, well, not very big, but $642,000 increase in personnel. That's a 3.3% increase. Part of that is a $135,000 increase to hire 2 additional police officers. For the last several years, patrol shifts has worked short because of turnover, injuries, and illness. 67 times last year, an off-duty officer had to fill in to maintain a minimum staffing of 5 per shift. Reports also take longer as officers play back videos to make sure their reports and the videos match up to ensure accuracy. And also, officers are also required more frequently to work community events such as parades and runs, and they're also assigned monthly registered sex offender checks. All these things have contributed to a need to hire 2 additional police officers. It takes about a year, but between the time we initiate that hiring until they actually become a full-fledged police officer. There's other personnel changes in the budget. There's a staff engineer included in the budget. We're hiring a communications director, and that was a service that we previously had a contract for. There was a vacant transfer station operator 1 position eliminated, and a full-time park caretaker was added, and 3 seasonal positions eliminated. And there was several positions reclassifications in the budget. In addition, there's a 2% cost of living adjustment in this budget, the normal merit pay increases, 6% increase in health insurance premiums, and a $5 per month per employee increase in the VIVA plan contributions. Debt service increases $278,000, and that's due to the June 4th Economic Development Fund bond that we issued for the pipeline funding. The LB 840 ballot issue that was passed in 2010 provided for us to issue bonds in anticipation of tax revenue, and we've done that, and the debt service on that bond issue is $381,000, and that's the driver for that increase in debt service expenditures this year. Partially offsetting that, we paid off the fire station bonds last year, the 2003 fire station bonds. Total capital outlay expenditures are the second largest category of expenditures, just behind personnel. And as I mentioned, for the 3rd year in a row, these remained almost unchanged at $19.5 million. There's a fair number of large capital outlays in this year's budget. I mentioned the $3.9 million that's in special assessment funds for 3 large water and sewer main extensions to serve industrial areas. There's also $1.6 million for the Southwest Sewer Interceptor, the $1.25 million I mentioned for the North Fork Riverfront Trail Project, $800,000 for the bridge over the river on Norfolk Avenue by Hy-Vee East, $577,000 for a 12-inch water main on Madison Avenue from 1st to 7th Street, $508,000 for HVAC replacement at the police station, $400,000 of street projects are in special assessment funds, $386,000 for a storage building at the street division, $360,000 to replace the fire division's self-contained breathing apparatus, and $355,000 for smaller trail projects, $350,000 to replace raw lift pumps at the water pollution control plant, $346,000 for unspecified council priority projects, $300,000 for the intersection improvements at 37th Street and Norfolk Avenue, $280,000 for grit dewatering equipment at the water pollution control plant, $267,000 to upgrade police radios and consoles, and $258,000 for a sewer lift station and sewer main improvements in Omaha Avenue and Victory Road. And those are just a few of our larger capital outlays, the ones over $250,000. We've got a whole plethora of smaller capital outlays totaling $7.5 million, and those are all detailed in the budget. If you look at pages 3-6, 3-13 in the budget document, you'll see all of our capital outlay budgeted this year, and any large over $100,000 capital outlay that we're planning over the next 4 years is also on those pages. That's what we plan to do next year, and the revenue side of the budget is where we plan on getting the money to do those things. This slide lists the 10 major revenue categories along with beginning fund balance. The biggest change is in proceeds of debt, which is budgeted to increase $2.4 million. And that's primarily because of the $2.7 million increase in special assessment debt to fund those 3 large utility main extensions to industrial areas that I mentioned earlier. Capital Construction Fund debt increases $740,000. Last year, we had $1,080,000 of public safety tax anticipation bonds budgeted, but we didn't issue them. We plan on issuing those bonds this year, along with an additional $740,000 for an ambulance, communications equipment, and mobile data console upgrades. Partially offsetting those increases is $1 million of sewer bonds budgeted last year but not issued, and we're not rebudgeting those either. Instead, we're doing that $1.7 million transfer I talked about earlier to fund those projects. The next largest revenue increase is in intermental revenue, which increases $2.2 million, or almost 42%. Biggest part of that's the $1.4 million site and building development fund grant I mentioned earlier that's going for the natural gas pipeline. Also, the $1,125,000 budgeted for the Norfolk Riverfront Trail project coming from other entities is in here. As I mentioned, $1 million is a grant from Game and Parks, and the other $125,000 is from the NRD. Partially offsetting that is $220,000 FEMA grant that we had last year to repair sewer lines damaged by flooding several years ago. Beginning balance increases $1.4 million, or 4.8%. That's primarily due to that $2,365,000 economic development bond I discussed. That's going to go for the natural gas pipeline. That money's still set in the LB 840 fund, and I'll expect that will be spent early next year. Partially offsetting this is a reduction of more than $1 million in the CHAF fund due to spending highway allocation proceeds last year on a number of street projects. Transfers increased $1.3 million. The biggest reason for this is that $1.7 million transfer I mentioned earlier from the water fund to the sewer fund. Partially offsetting that is $309,000 decrease in transfers to the capital projects fund. Keno had been funding several park personnel costing over $190,000 annually. And going forward, this $190,000 will instead be used for park and recreation capital. And the reason for this is we can use Keno for a broader array of expenditures than we can tax dollars, and this will give us the flexibility in the future to defer capital outlay and use Keno for economic development if we get an opportunity coming along that we think warrants it. And the council decided to use half of their uncommitted council priority money, or $107,000, to fund a portion of those park personnel, and that decreases the amount that's available for transfer to the capital construction fund. Remaining $86,000 of park personnel will come from property tax. There's also $76,000 of smaller projects in this budget funded directly with council priority money in the general fund. They were under $50,000, so our cutoff for expenditures out of the capital construction fund is $50,000. That's the CIP cutoff, and that's also the capital construction fund cutoff. So the Newport Trail, storm sewer outfall, and illuminated street signs were under that, and they totaled $76,000. And that money will be spent directly in the general fund, further reducing the transfer. In addition, there was a $150,000 transfer last year from the wireless 911 fund for the E911 fund equipment, but out of the capital construction fund that's not budgeted this year. Taxes increased $417,000, or 4.83%. Most of this is a $342,000 increase in general fund property tax, and I'll discuss that in a little more detail when I review the general fund. There's also a $71,000 increase in lodging, food, and beverage occupation tax, which is budgeted in the debt service fund, and that's the money that's being accumulated to pay those bonds off next year that were issued for the recreation project. Charges for services increases $417,000, or 3.13%. $212,000 of this is in the group insurance fund because of a 6% increase in employee and employer health insurance rates. Ambulance charges also increased $50,000 because of an increase in rates October 1 of 2013. That was almost a year ago, but we didn't get a full year of those increased rates in last year's budget because it takes a couple months for those ambulance charges to get billed out, go through the process of insurance and finally get to our hands. And since it's a cash-basis budget, we don't recognize that revenue until it's in our hands. So part of that increase is recognized in this year's budget. Use fees in the enterprise funds increased $136,000 or 1.74%. There are no rate increases in the enterprise funds from current rates. However, last year, we did not budget an increase for the transfer station, but there was a big increase in February 2014 when we renewed the transportation contract to haul waste to landfill. That necessitated an increase in our transfer station rates that went into effect June 1st of this year. So although actual rates aren't increasing from what they currently are, the budget last year did not have the June 1 rate increase in it. There's also a slight increase in water usage budgeted. Changes in other revenue categories are relatively minor. We have over 20 funds that we budget. There's the general fund, 10 special revenue funds, the debt service fund, capital projects fund, 3 special assessment funds, 3 enterprise funds, and 1 internal service fund, the group insurance fund. Our large funds, those over $5 million, make up the lion's share of that. Those 6 funds comprise over 3/4 of the budget. And I've discussed some major changes in most of these funds previously, but I want to spend a little bit more time on the general fund, since it's by far the largest fund the city has. It alone comprises almost 30% of the city's budget and includes the traditional municipal functions that most people associate with the city: police, fire, streets, parks, rec, and library. This slide details the changes by department or division in the general fund. There's 9 divisions in the general fund, and their changes from the prior year are shown on this slide. Over half the increases in the police division, which goes up $184,000, primarily by hiring the 2 additional police officers I discussed earlier. Fire division expenditures increased $141,000, primarily due to a $104,000 increase in capital outlay, which includes $35,000 for window replacement, $35,000 for bunker gear, $26,000 for a power cot loader, $25,000 for an inspector's vehicle, and $25,000 for a Hirsch Jaws set for the second fire station. Street division increases $130,000 because of the $76,000 of smaller items funded from council priority money, the Nucor Trail storm sewer outfall, and the illuminated street signs I mentioned earlier. Engineering increases $84,000, primarily because of the addition of the new staff engineer. Administration actually decreases $277,000, and that's primarily because of the $206,000 decrease in transfers to the capital projects fund. As I discussed earlier, council priority dollars were transferred because of the use of council priority money to partially fund park personnel. We have less money to transfer, and that was always budgeted in the administration fund. So that causes the big decrease in transfers out of the administration fund. Here you can see where we get the money to fund those expenditures. The lion's share of the general fund revenue comes from sales tax. Almost 40% of our general fund budget is sales tax, about $7.7 million. The other large revenue we have is NPPD lease revenue. That's about 1/4 of general fund revenue, or $4.7 million. And coming in at a distant third is property taxes, a little over $1.8 million, or less than 10% of general fund revenue. And all of our other revenue sources put together make up about 1/4 of the general fund budget. Sales tax, our largest revenue source. This slide shows what's been happening with that the last 10 years. You can see we've had some years where we had some fairly nice increases in sales tax growth, and we've actually had a year where we had a decrease. Most of the years have been relatively modest increase. We had $6.6 million of sales tax budgeted in 2006. We're budgeting $7.7 million in 2015. That's a compounded annual increase of 1.75%, which isn't even keeping up with inflation. Inflation over that period was over 2.5%, compound annual rate of increase. This year, you can see that last bar is almost the same as if next to the last bar, we're only budgeting a $27,000 increase in sales tax, or 0.36%. Our next largest revenue source, MPPD lease revenue. This slide, it shows what's been happening with that for the last 10 years. We had some good revenue increases in the middle of that period, as you can see from this slide. But for the last 3 years, it's been pretty much flat. And we're actually budgeting a $21,000 decrease in NPPD lease revenue this year. Here's what's been happening with the city's property tax. This shows the property tax for the 3 funds that are levied against the entire city. There's also a small amount of property tax levied in the vehicle parking fund. That only impacts a vehicle parking district, which is downtown Norfolk. And those businesses always elect to levy the maximum 35 cents allowed by law. As you can see by this slide, our property tax has remained constant except for the $400,000 voter-approved LB 840 fund increase in 2010. Other than that, we have not had an increase in the previous 5 years. This is the first year in the last 6 years that we're budgeting a property tax increase. As I mentioned, there's several reasons for that. $135,000 is the tax needed for the 2 additional police officers. There's also $86,000 to fund the park personnel formerly paid with Keno that isn't coming from half of the council priority money. And then we're also had a increase in assessed valuation this year. This is a chart of what our assessed value's done for the last 10 years. As you can see early on, we were having nice increases in assessed value, and that historically had been the case. We almost always had a 4% or better increase in assessed valuations, except for the last 4 years when we had almost no increase in assessed valuation. This year that we're in now, this current budget year, is the first time in 5 years that we've had a good increase in assessed value. It's back to over 4% like it used to be, 4.67% increase in assessed value. And we're actually going to allow our property tax to increase for that 4.6% increase in assessed value. We have not, the period of time when those property tax assessed valuations weren't increasing, we also weren't increasing our property tax. So our levy rate was actually going down a little bit because there never was a year in here where we had a decrease in our assessed valuation. We had relatively minor increases and relatively minor decreases in levy rate throughout that period of time. But during that period of time, the CPI increased 11%. This increase is about $120,000, and it will bring our total general fund property tax asking increase up $342,000. This will increase the city's levy rate from 22.8 cents to 24.7 cents. This is a 1.86 cent increase in our levy rate, relatively small increase. If you have a $100,000 home, you'll pay $18.60 more in property tax next year due to that rate increase.
Say it again, Randy, you said 22.8 to what is it now, 24? Is that?
The 2013 levy rate was 22.8 cents, and it's going to 24.7 cents.
Okay.
Actually, a little bit less than that if you want to carry it out at numerous decimal
That's okay.
points.
Right.
And I think we'll still have the fourth lowest levy rate of all the 31st class cities. This is a bar chart showing all 31st class cities, including Norfolk. This is the 2013 property tax rate, since I don't yet know what's going to happen for 2014 with these other cities. I do know what's going to happen with the city of Norfolk, and that's that blue bar on this chart. The black bar on this chart was Norfolk's levy rate in 2013, that 22.8 cents I talked about, and the blue bar is at 24.7 cents. So you can see real minor increase in our levy rate, and we'll still be significantly below the next lowest first-class city, even with that small increase in levy rate. This is a chart showing all the major revenue increases in the general fund. As you can see, there isn't really much change in the general fund except for the tax increases I mentioned. There's that small sales tax increase of about $20,000 and that $342,000 increase in property taxes. There's that $369,000 increase in taxes in the general fund. The only other change of significance is the $67,000 increase in charges for services, which is the ambulance increase of $50,000 I mentioned earlier. All these other changes are real minor, and you can see that $8,700 decrease in rent and other revenue is because of that decrease in NPPD lease revenue I mentioned. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, or I believe we've got almost all the department division heads here tonight also. If you got detailed questions on their budgets, I'd be happy to come forward and answer them also.
Well, thank you, Randy. I firmly believe there's nothing you couldn't answer for us. So, council, if you have any questions for him, or
Randy, a question on you said the assessed values for 2014 are going to be up 4.67%?
Yes.
So that was taken into account when figuring the 2014, 2015 budget, correct?
Yes.
You know, when you're setting the additional mill levy, you're taking that 120,000 into account, and then,
We're taking that 120,000 and adding those other two things I mentioned on top of it to get 342,000.
any
And
other?
those evaluations are set by Madison.
Yes. And as you know, from newspaper stories, you probably heard there was a revaluation in the northeast part of town. Some of them people had much bigger increases than 4.67. That was one of them.
Thank you.
Any other questions at all, council? This is a public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience that wants to address, come forward and ask questions of? Okay. Seeing none then, I'm going to close the public hearing. And we're going to look for consideration first of ordinance number 5316, approving the fiscal year 2014-15 appropriations and, and the proprietary budget, both together there, okay? Do I have a motion as such?
Your Honor, I'd move consideration of ordinance number 5316.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion with a second to approve ordinance number 5316, approving the fiscal budget as presented us. Any further discussion at all? If not, Beth, we'll look for a short title.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska, adopting the budget statement to be termed the annual appropriation bill, appropriating sums for necessary expenses and liabilities, adopting the proprietary budget statement, providing for severability, providing when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect, and providing for publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
And with that, I would ask you to please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5316 carries on first reading.
Your Honor, we'll need to pass this on 3 readings since
State.
the budget's due at the state on September 20th.
Your Honor, I would move that we suspend the rules and pass ordinance 5316 on second and third reading.
Second.
Okay, you've heard the motion with a second to suspend the rules and pass on second and third reading. If no further discussion or question, again, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5316 carries on second and third.
Okay, nice job, Randy. Appreciate that. Next, we're going to move on to consideration of Resolution 2014-31, approving the additional 1% increase in restricted fund authority allowed upon the affirmative vote of at least 75% of this council.
Your Honor, I'd move consideration of resolution 2014-31.
Second?
All right, we have a motion with a second. Discussion on this? Do we need to address this? Any questions, anyone?
I'll say for the general purpose, is there anyone on staff that can address this? I mean, I know it happens every year, but for the people in
General
the
public?
audience, or the general audience listening at home,
Can you do that, Randy, for us?
Yes. We're under a lid in Nebraska law, which generally limits cities to a 2.5% increase in restricted funds every year. And that's property tax, sales tax, city highway allocation funds. There's a fairly long list of tax type revenues that are under this lid. And under that lid, you get a 2.5% increase in that every year, or upon a 1%, you get another 1% upon a vote of the city council. I think that has to be a 6-person vote. I think it's a supermajority vote. If you get a supermajority vote, then you get an additional 1% increase. That doesn't mean you're to actually use that. Most years we don't use that, but it gives us the authority if we need to down the road to have that additional increase. And it just carries forward if it isn't used until you do use it, or you may never use it. But we have always in the past an additional 1% to keep our options open going forward. It does not affect any revenues in this year's budget, because we have plenty of unused budget authority to do everything we want to do in this year's budget without that. But I do recommend that we pass it for the future.
thank you.
Okay. Any questions at all about that? All
I
right.
have a question. I mean, if we've already got budgeted without this 1% increase, then what's the need to have this included in the?
Well, take for instance, if you would decide you weren't going to be in Larm anymore. One of the exemptions you have under this lid is interlocal agreements, and there's $500,000 or $600,000 of interlocal agreement revenue that comes off as an exemption. If we'd lose that exemption, we would have major lid problems. We probably wouldn't meet the lid in this year's budget if we'd lose that exemption. So you want to keep flexibility going forward, or I think you want to keep that flexibility going forward to have that carryover amount as high as possible. So if you, say, would decide you didn't want to be in Larm anymore, you would have the ability to do that and have more of a, you'd have a better ability to do that if you continue to pass every year like we have every year in the past, I believe, this additional 1% increase. There's all kinds of exemptions. I mentioned that it was mainly the tax type revenues that's in there, but then they give you all kinds of exemptions that can come off of that. Capital outlay is one, interlocal agreements is one, debt service is another. Well, say something you'd, in some year, want to use your funding for something other than capital outlay. That could cause you lid problems. So it's nice to have as much flexibility in there as you can, even if you didn't think you wanted to increase your revenues. You may want to do something different with the expenditure side. That's an exception to the lid, and you could conceivably have problems just because you changed how you were spending your money.
All right. Any other questions at all? If not, then I would ask that you please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, Resolution 2014-31 is adopted.
Okay, and next is a public hearing to receive comments regarding changing the vehicle parking fund and the general fund tax request for the 2014-15 fiscal year from the amounts for the 2013-14 fiscal year. I will open this public hearing, and we look to you, Randy.
This is a requirement of statutes. Anytime you change your levy rate, whether it's an increase or a decrease, you got to hold a hearing and say why you're changing your tax asking from the prior year, and publish notice, pass approval of changing that tax asking from the amounts of the prior year. And as I mentioned, the vehicle parking districts changes every year because their valuation changes, and they always keep theirs at 35 cents. And we're changing our tax asking for those three reasons I mentioned earlier. So those two funds are the general fund and the vehicle parking fund are changing, and we could even have decreases like we do some years, and you still have to go through this step anytime you have a change in property tax asking.
Okay. Any questions for Randy on that? Yep, you're right. Again, public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience that wants to come forward and may have questions to this? Okay, if not, and no further discussion from the council, then I would ask that I'm going to close this public hearing, and we're going to look for consideration of Resolution 2014-32, approving the property tax request for the fiscal year 2014-15 for the Vehicle Parking Fund and the General Fund in the amounts different than fiscal year 2013-14.
I'll move for consideration of resolution number 2014-32.
Second that, Your Honor.
All right, we have a motion with a second. Any further discussion at all? Then I would ask you to vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, Resolution 2014-32 is adopted.
Okay, we're going to move on to, under the regular agenda, consideration of ordinance 5317, approving the fiscal year 2014-15 classification and pay plan. I'm looking for consideration.
I'll introduce ordinance 5317 on first reading.
Second.
All right, we have a motion with a second. Discussion here. This is Randy again.
This simply approves the pay plan that's in the budget that you just voted on.
Right.
If you approve the budget, you basically approve the pay plan, but this is formally adopting the pay plan included in that budget.
Any questions at all? Okay, Beth, short title.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska, classifying the employees of the city, fixing the ranges of compensation of such employees, providing a pay range, repealing ordinance number 5265, providing when publication of this is in pamphlet form, and when this ordinance takes effect.
And with that, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5317 carries on first reading.
Your Honor, I'd move that we suspend the rules and pass ordinance number 5317 on second and third reading.
Second.
All right, you heard the motion with a second to suspend the rules and pass ordinance 5317 on second and third. If no further discussion, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5317 carries on second and third.
Okay, can I do these all, can you give explanation on all four of these together? Would you do that? Okay, all right. All right. As you will note, it looks like the next four items on the agenda are looking for approval to reenact ordinances, and we'll take them one by one, but I'll ask Clint to give us reason for something that we had already, I believe, taken care of, and
Yes, that's correct. All of those ordinances were on the prior city council agenda, the next four, 26, 27, 28, 29. And so the concern that was found out is that there was one of the required publications for this meeting that had the wrong, that for the prior meeting that had the wrong date on it. And so what we're going to do, or what we're proposing to do, is have the council just reenact the ordinance and affirm the action that you took at the last council meeting. Those are especially important as it relates to the last three ordinances relating to the paving districts. We want to make sure that we've got a good record in regard to those, so that no one can use that to call into question the validity of the paving assessments, which will eventually come from those districts. You would have noted that on the consent agenda, there was also an item on there where you affirmed and ratified all of the actions taken on the consent agenda at the last meeting. So we're just doing a little house cleaning in regard to that, to adjust for that that incorrect date that was in one of the numerous publications that have to be made for a meeting of the body. If you have any questions, be happy to answer.
I bet our nursing students are excited they were here tonight.
not going.
Picked a good meeting.
Great night.
Yeah, you did. You did.
Not
I think
going.
next year maybe you ought to suggest that they consider maybe any month but September to send the students. It might be well received, so. All right, let's take consideration of ordinance number 5318 to reenact 5312, amending section 27.2 of the official city code to add definition for municipal solid waste and industrial solid waste. Looking for a motion.
I'll introduce ordinance 5318 on first reading.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion with a second. We had discussion on what we're doing, so with that, short title, Beth?
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska to reenact ordinance number 5312 passed by the Norfolk City Council on September 2nd, 2014, adding definitions for municipal solid waste and industrial solid waste to section 27.2 of the official city code, to provide when the ordinance is in full force and effect, and to provide for publication of the ordinance in pamphlet form.
And with that, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5318 carries on first reading.
Your Honor, I'll make a motion, we pass ordinance 5318 on second and third.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and pass ordinance number 5318 on second and third. If no further discussion, again, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5318 carries on second and third.
Next is consideration of approval of ordinance 5319 to reenact ordinance number 5313, creating paving district number 505, providing for paving of North 34th Street from approximately 375 feet north of Silver Fox Avenue, continuing northwesterly approximately 340 feet to the end of the circle.
Your Honor, I'd move consideration of ordinance number 5319 on first reading.
Second.
All right, motion with a second. Again, we've heard the purpose of, short title, Beth.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska to reenact ordinance number 5313 passed by the Norfolk City Council on September 2nd, 2014, creating paving district number 505, providing when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect, and providing for publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
Please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5319 carries on first reading.
Your Honor, I'd move that we suspend the rules and pass ordinance 5319 on second and third reading.
Second.
Motion with the second. You've heard to suspend the rules and pass on second and third. I'm going to ask that you vote, please.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5319 carries on second and third.
Next is consideration of approval of ordinance number 5320 to reenact ordinance number 5314, creating paving district number 506, providing for paving of Marconet Circle from approximately 453 feet to the end of Marconet Circle.
Your Honor, I'll introduce ordinance 5320 on first reading.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion with a second. Short title, Beth.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska to reenact ordinance number 5314 passed by the Norfolk City Council on September 2nd, 2014, creating paving district number 506, providing when the ordinance is in full force and effect, and providing for publication of the ordinance in pamphlet form.
And with that, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5320 carries on first reading.
Your Honor, I move we suspend the rules and pass ordinance 5320 on second and third.
Second.
All right, you heard the motion with a second to suspend the rules and pass ordinance number 5320 on second and third. Please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5320 carries on second and third.
And finally is consideration of approval of ordinance number 5321 to reenact ordinance number 5315, creating paving district number 507, providing for paving of Regency Circle North from approximately 105 feet north of Andrews Drive, continuing north approximately 228 feet to the end of Regency Circle North.
Your Honor, I would move consideration of ordinance number 5321.
Second.
All right, we have a motion with a second. Short title, Beth.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska to reenact ordinance number 5315 passed by the Norfolk City Council on September 2nd, 2014, creating paving district number 507, providing when this ordinance is in full force and effect, and providing for publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
Please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5321 carries on first reading.
Your Honor, I move we suspend the rules and pass ordinance 5321 on second and third.
Second that, Your Honor.
All right, we have a motion with a second to suspend the rules and pass ordinance 5321 on second and third reading. Please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5321 carries on second and third.
Okay, this is correct. All right. We are at the end of the agenda other than a public comment period. If there's anyone that wants to come forward in the audience and speak to this council with concerns, recommendations, thoughts, we'd be glad to hear you. We just ask you to come forward, sign in, and speak to us. Now, I will tell you that there's no action that can be taken, but we're glad to hear you. Anyone? None of you nurses? Nursing students? Okay. Then seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.